Buy your sweet, fresh bread.
Is that not Sandra? How did she end up selling bread on the street? What happened? How did you end up here?
It's a long story, Daniel.
He couldn't believe his eyes. His ex-girlfriend, the one who left him for a rich guy, was now standing on the roadside, selling bread just to survive. Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Memories of their laughter, their dreams, and the heartbreak of that fateful day flooded back. But what he did next will shock you. He didn't yell. He didn't judge. He simply walked up to her, sat down, and asked one question. That would change her life forever. The rest, you won't see coming. Sit tight, let me tell you this shocking story. Watch till the very end. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Daniel rode his logistics bike through the busy streets of Lagos, weaving effortlessly between the honking cars and pedestrians. He had been doing this job for years, but every delivery still gave him a sense of purpose. The hum of the engine beneath him, the wind brushing against his face, and the thrill of getting packages to customers on time, it all made him feel alive. Daniel had a reputation in the company. He was dependable, hard-working, and always wore a warm smile that brightened even the dullest of Lagos afternoons. Today, like most days, he was headed to a familiar address in Lekki. A small flat apartment, tucked away in a quiet street lined with flowering bougainvillea. And waiting for him there was Sandra. Daniel couldn't help but feel a thrill every time he saw her. She was beautiful, vibrant, and had a laugh that could melt any stress away. More than that, she was the reason his heart raced even after a long day of deliveries. Sandra, on her part, always waited outside the gate when Daniel arrived. Today was no different. She stood on the small porch, wearing a simple sundress, her hair neatly done. The moment she spotted him, she waved, and Daniel's grin widened. He parked the bike carefully, removed his helmet, and jogged up the small steps. "Hey, my favorite delivery guy," Sandra teased as Daniel handed her the small package he had brought. Today it was a surprise, her favorite ice cream. Daniel laughed, his eyes sparkling. "You know I can never show up empty-handed. I'm not just delivering packages, I'm delivering smiles too," he said, handing her the ice cream. They sat together on the low wall outside the gate, talking about everything and nothing. Daniel recounted a funny incident from a previous delivery, and Sandra laughed so hard she almost dropped her ice cream. He loved these moments, the quiet, simple joys that made all the struggles worth it. But not everyone shared their happiness. Inside the flat, Mrs. Rose, Sandra's mother, watched them through the window. Her face twisted in disapproval. She did not like that her daughter was dating a poor delivery rider. "Sandra," she said sharply, her voice echoing in the room, "I don't want you following a poor boy around. Look at him. He barely makes enough to live. What? Aren't you looking at rich men, like I told you?" Sandra turned to her mother, frowning. "Mummy, please don't call him names. Daniel is hard-working. He may not have money now, but he has a bright future, and he truly loves me." Mrs. Rose's lips pressed into a thin line. "Love doesn't pay bills, Sandra. You will see soon. Enough. One day, it will become clear who is really worth your attention. Just wait." Meanwhile, Daniel and Sandra remained unaware of the growing tension. They continued talking, sharing dreams and little jokes. Daniel's heart swelled every time Sandra leaned closer to him. He had always been proud of his work, but with Sandra by his side, even a simple delivery felt extraordinary. Suddenly, the tranquility was shattered. Mrs. Rose stormed out of the house, carrying a bucket of water. Before Daniel could even react, the icy liquid splashed over his head. He staggered, back, dripping wet, and looked up to see Mrs. Rose's furious glare. "I told you! I don't want to see you with my daughter again!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the afternoon air. Sandra gasped, covering her mouth. "Mummy! Stop! Daniel, I'm so sorry," she said, rushing to grab a towel for him. But Daniel only smiled weakly, wiping water from his face. He could feel his heart ache, but he refused to lose his composure. "I'll be okay, Sandra. Don't worry about me," he said softly, his voice steady even as embarrassment and hurt lingered in his eyes. Mrs. Rose glared one last time, then stormed back into the house, leaving Daniel and Sandra standing in silence. The moment was heavy with tension. Sandra looked up at him, eyes wide with apology and worry. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. Daniel smiled faintly. "I'll survive. It's not the first time I've been drenched in Lagos. Let's just enjoy the ice cream," he said, trying to lighten the mood. They sat together for a while longer, sharing ice cream and laughter, the earlier incident slowly fading into the background. Daniel couldn't help but feel a sense of determination stirring within him. One day, he thought, things would change. He would make something of himself, not for revenge, not for pride, but so that love and respect would follow him wherever he went. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the Lekki streets, Daniel knew that this was only the beginning. Despite the obstacles, despite the disapproval, despite the challenges that came with being poor in a city that valued wealth, he was determined to hold on to what mattered most: his dreams, his integrity, and his love for Sandra. Little did he know, fate was already beginning to shift in unexpected ways. Across the street, a sleek, black Mercedes-Benz glided by. Inside was John, a young billionaire, driving to visit a friend. When he saw Sandra standing outside, talking and laughing with Daniel, he couldn't take his eyes off her. "Who is this beautiful girl?" he whispered to himself, curiosity sparking in his mind. He stopped the car, stepped out, and approached her with a charming smile. "Hi. What's a beautiful lady like you doing out here?" he asked. Sandra blinked, surprised by his sudden appearance. I'm just waiting for someone," she said shyly. "I'm John," he said, extending a hand. "And you are?" "Sandra," she replied, shaking his hand. There was an instant, unspoken connection. They talked briefly, exchanged numbers, and he offered to drop her home. Sandra hesitated but eventually accepted. When Mrs. Rose saw the luxury car John drove and the way he treated her daughter, her face lit up with a proud smile. "This is what I've been telling her," she muttered, satisfaction in her voice. As the day ended, Daniel left with a heavy heart, unaware that his life, and Sandra's, was about to change in ways neither of them could yet imagine. But even in that heartbreak, a quiet flame of determination burned within him. He would not give up. He would not be broken. He would rise, and one day the world would notice. The next morning, Daniel woke up earlier than usual, the memory of yesterday still fresh in his mind. He tried to shake off the cold water dripping from his hair, but the image of Mrs. Rose's angry glare and Sandra's worried face lingered. He sighed deeply, tying his shoelaces and checking his delivery list. Business didn't stop for heartbreak. Lagos was too busy, too loud, too relentless to pause for anyone's feelings. By 7, he was on his bike again, weaving through traffic and delivering packages across the city. Daniel had learned early that efficiency, reliability, and a smile went a long way, even if the pay wasn't extraordinary. He greeted customers warmly, dropped parcels at doorsteps, and always made a point to leave a good impression. But deep inside, his mind kept wandering back to Sandra, The way she laughed, the way her hand had brushed against his when she took the ice cream, and the pain of Mrs. Rose's interference. Meanwhile, Sandra's life was already starting to shift. The day after Daniel was drenched, she had barely recovered from the shock when John called. "Hi, Sandra," his deep voice echoed through her phone. "Are you free today? I'd love to see you." Sandra felt a flutter in her chest. She hesitated, glancing toward the living room where her mother, Mrs. Rose, was arranging the house. Seeing her mother's approving smile, she answered confidently, "Sure, I can step out for a bit." John arrived in his sleek Mercedes-Benz, the engine purring softly as he parked. His presence was commanding, yet somehow gentle. He greeted Sandra with a smile that made her heart skip a beat. "Shall we go?" he asked, offering her his arm. She took it, feeling the thrill of luxury and attention she hadn't experienced with Daniel. As they drove through Leckie's bustling streets, Sandra couldn't help but compare her feelings. Daniel had always been kind, dependable, and warm. John was exciting, confident, and rich, everything her mother had told her to look for. At that moment, the decision seemed easy. Maybe it was time to follow her mother's advice. By evening, Sandra had started talking to John on the phone constantly. They laughed at silly jokes, shared stories about their lives, and grew closer with each passing call. Her mother's satisfaction was evident. "This is what I've been telling you," she said one night, watching Sandra giggle at her phone. "A rich man can give you everything. You'll see Daniel wasn't enough for you." Daniel, however, remained unaware of how quickly things were changing. The next day he had a surprise for Sandra, a small package containing a gift she had mentioned wanting weeks ago. He imagined her delight as he made his way to her flat, eager to see her smile. When he arrived, he stopped at the gate and called out her name. "Sandra!" But the moment Sandra appeared, Daniel's heart sank. She wasn't alone. John was standing beside her, holding her hand casually, a protective arm around her shoulder. Their laughter echoed across the quiet street. Daniel's mind raced, trying to comprehend what he was seeing. "Baby, who's this?" John said smoothly, noticing Daniel. He looked at Sandra, then back at the delivery rider. "Why is he calling you?" Sandra's face turned pale. Daniel's eyes searched hers for an explanation, but her lips trembled. "Daniel, I'm with my man now. I can't be with you anymore," she said, her voice breaking slightly. Daniel felt the world shift beneath him. "But why? Don't I deserve an explanation?" he asked, his voice strained but steady. Sandra shook her head and whispered, "I'm sorry." Then, without another word, she let go of Daniel's gaze and stepped closer to John, leaving Daniel standing there, stunned and drenched. In disbelief, not with water this time, but with heartbreak. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his small bed, replaying the scene in his mind. Sandra's laughter with John, the gentle sway of her hand in his, the casual kiss John planted on her forehead, all of it pressed down on him like a weight he couldn't shake. He thought about all the moments he had shared with Sandra, the sacrifices, the small surprises, the countless hours of devotion. And now, it seemed it had all been for nothing. But as dawn broke, Daniel made a silent vow. Life wouldn't stop because his heart was broken. He had work to do. He had dreams to chase. And more than anything, he refused to let his current circumstances define his future. That day, Daniel resumed his deliveries, moving from one street to another, greeting customers with the same warm smile he was known for. But this time, there was a fire burning inside him. He began thinking about ways to grow beyond being just a delivery rider. Perhaps one day he could start his own logistics company, something bigger, something lasting. In the meantime, Sandra's life with John was a sharp contrast. She enjoyed the luxury, the attention, the thrill of living in a mansion, wearing stylish outfits, and being surrounded by wealth. But Daniel's absence left a quiet emptiness she didn't notice at first. John was charming, but he was also unpredictable. He started bringing other women to the mansion, flaunting them in front of Sandra. She felt invisible, powerless, and alone, but she couldn't admit it, not even to herself. Meanwhile, Daniel's determination began to bear fruit. He started reading business books every night after work, learning about entrepreneurship, logistics management, and partnerships. Every spare moment was spent studying and planning. He reached out to a local logistics company, proposing a partnership. To his surprise, they agreed to give him a chance. Daniel's diligence, honesty, and innovative ideas impressed them. Slowly but steadily, his small steps began to grow into something significant. 2 months later, Daniel's business was taking off. The deliveries were faster, the clients were satisfied, and he was gaining a reputation as a reliable entrepreneur. He rode his own branded delivery bikes through Lagos, a far cry from the humble beginnings he had started with. Meanwhile, John's treatment of Sandra worsened. One afternoon, without warning, John ordered her out of the mansion. "My real girlfriend is coming today. I don't want you here. Leave now." Tears streamed down Sandra's face as she gathered her belongings, realizing she had nothing left. She had not saved any money, relying entirely on John's wealth. Now she had to survive on her own. Sandra set up a small roadside stall selling bread, trying to make ends meet. She smiled at passing customers, but her eyes carried the weight of disappointment, loss, and regret. Life had humbled her in ways she had never imagined. One afternoon, as Daniel drove through a busy street in his now well-earned Benz G-Wagon, he spotted a familiar figure standing by a small bread table. His heart skipped a beat. Sandra looked smaller somehow, her vibrant energy muted by circumstance, yet she still smiled at the two young men buying bread. Daniel stopped his car, stepped out, and approached her slowly. "Sandra?" he asked softly. Sandra froze, shock and recognition flooding her eyes. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" she whispered, voice trembling. Daniel looked at her, eyes full of compassion rather than anger. "What happened? How did you end up here?" Tears welled in Sandra's eyes. "It's a long story," she said, her voice breaking. Daniel nodded, sitting on a nearby bench beside her. He did not judge, did not laugh, did not scold. He simply listened as Sandra poured out her heartbreak, her struggles, and her mistakes. For 2 hours, he remained there, patient, understanding, and kind. Then he asked one simple question: "What did you always love doing before everything went wrong?" Sandra whispered, barely audible, "I used to love fashion. I wanted to design clothes." Daniel smiled gently. "Then that's what we'll focus on," he said. Daniel watched Sandra's face as she whispered about her dream of designing clothes. Her voice trembled, but her eyes sparkled with a tiny, persistent light, a reminder of the girl he had once loved. He didn't laugh. He didn't judge. All he felt was a deep compassion, mixed with a quiet determination to help her rise again. "You used to love fashion," he said softly. "Then that's what we're going to focus on. I'll help you. You won't owe me anything. I just want to see you succeed." Sandra blinked, stunned. Tears began streaming down her face. "Daniel, why? After everything?" He smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Because what I do now isn't about love or revenge. It's about helping someone who was lost find her path again. You had dreams before you were pushed into corners. I just want to give you a chance to chase them. The next week, Daniel enrolled Sandra in a professional fashion design school in Surulere. He paid the full fees, secured her a small, well-furnished studio apartment nearby, and made sure she had the tools she needed: sewing machines, fabrics, and reference books. This is not a loan, he reminded her. And this is not love. This is just one human being helping another. Don't waste it. Sandra worked tirelessly. She spent her days in classes and evenings in her studio, practicing patterns, sketching designs, and creating small collections. Slowly, she began to rediscover her confidence, her creativity, and her passion for fashion. She often thought about Daniel's generosity, wondering why he would help her after everything, but she never asked for anything in return. Meanwhile, Daniel's logistics business continued to grow. His dedication, discipline, and innovative approach earned him more contracts, and he soon expanded his fleet of delivery bikes into trucks, covering larger areas of the city. Daniel had started as a simple delivery rider, but now he was a rising entrepreneur, respected in his field and known for his integrity. 2 months after Daniel helped Sandra, John, the young billionaire who had once taken Sandra from him, was no longer a part of her life. His other girlfriends had become the center of his attention, and he had grown careless with Sandra. One day, he had thrown her out of his mansion, declaring that his real girlfriend was coming. Tears had streaked down Sandra's face as she left with nothing but a few belongings, humiliated and heartbroken. Now, standing in her studio, surrounded by fabrics and sewing tools, Sandra felt a quiet strength she hadn't known before. She thought of John, of his arrogance, and realized that wealth and charm meant nothing without integrity and kindness. Daniel had shown her that. Back in Lekki, Mrs. Rose had heard whispers about Daniel's success. The same young man she had once scolded, poured water on, and dismissed as poor, was now a wealthy entrepreneur. Curious and proud, though not entirely willing to admit she had been wrong, she dressed in her finest lace and took a taxi to Victoria Island to visit his office. When she arrived, she was escorted into Daniel's office. She smiled broadly. "Daniel, my son, I always knew you would be great. I've always supported you," she said, trying to mask a mixture of guilt and admiration. Daniel looked at her calmly. He raised one hand, signaling her to stop. "Mama Rose," he said, his voice measured, "Sandra is doing well. That's all I have to say." He stood, shook her hand politely, and walked away. His PA quietly showed Mrs. Rose the door. The older woman left the office, stunned, realizing that Daniel had become a man of principle, unshaken by the past and unwilling to let petty pride interfere with doing what was right. 2 years later, Sandra's dedication paid off. She launched her fashion brand, Sandra Rose Designs, at a stylish event in Eco Hotel. The event was glamorous, attended by celebrities, influencers, and media personalities from across Nigeria. Her designs, sophisticated, elegant, and innovative, were met with admiration and excitement. As Sandra stood on the stage, giving her speech, she looked around at the crowd. She didn't mention John. She didn't mention Mrs. Rose. Her focus was on the journey, the lessons, and the people who had truly helped her rise. "There was a man who saw me at my lowest," she said, her voice steady and clear. "And instead of walking past, he stopped. He didn't give me fish. He gave me a net. And I will never stop being grateful." In the third row, Daniel sat quietly. His suit was sharp, his posture confident, but his attention was solely on Sandra. He clapped softly, pride radiating from him. The two were no longer lovers, and they were not enemies. They were two people who had once loved each other, who had faced betrayal and hardship, and who had discovered a rare kind of connection, mutual respect and support. After the event, Sandra came down from the stage and walked directly to Daniel. She smiled genuinely, eyes shining. "Thank you," she whispered. Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did all the work. I just helped you get started. I'm proud of you." Sandra nodded, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She realized that success was not just about wealth, luxury, or power. It was about integrity, compassion, and the willingness to help others rise. Daniel smiled faintly. "Life has a funny way of teaching lessons," he said softly. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to understand what really matters." Sandra laughed quietly, a soft, relieved sound. "I've learned that now. And I'll never forget it." That evening, as the city of Lagos shimmered with lights, Daniel drove home in his G-Wagon. He thought about his journey, from a delivery rider drenched in water outside a gate to a successful entrepreneur helping someone he cared about. He felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond money or recognition. Meanwhile, Sandra returned to her studio, sketching her next collection. She no longer needed John's wealth or approval. She had something far more valuable: self-respect, skill, and the unwavering support of a man who believed in her when no one else did. In the end, Daniel and Sandra's story was not about romantic reunion, revenge, or heartbreak alone. It was about growth, kindness, and the extraordinary outcomes that come when people rise above ego and help each other become the best versions of themselves. Two people, once lovers, now walked parallel paths, strong, successful, and free from past resentment. And in that rare intersection of lives, they found something even more precious than love: respect, gratitude, and the fulfillment that comes from seeing someone bloom because of your faith in them. The streets of Lagos continued to buzz with life, but in their corner of the world, Daniel and Sandra had discovered something timeless: that true success is measured not by wealth, but by the lives you lift and the integrity with which you walk your path. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. What would you have done if you were Daniel or Sandra? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. And tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Stay tuned. More inspiring stories are coming your way.